Chapter 111 Suspicious Duo. If there was one thing Michael liked about dealing with unfamiliar people in places he wandered into to handle business, it was how quickly they got to the point. On the flip side, what he hated was the difficulty of effective negotiation with strangers in such settings. There were pros and cons, but in the association, it hardly mattered now. He was here to sell, not buy. If he had wanted to purchase something, he'd have preferred to deal with Brian, or worse, the middle-aged man who had attended to him earlier in the afternoon. As he liked, the trade center staff quickly got to the point. After nearly an hour of trade, Michael sold the corpses he'd brought earlier in the day. Though the sale didn't significantly boost his account balance, which still hovered around $1 million, it was a nice profit for something he had picked up and returned. With his business at the association concluded, Michael headed back to his hotel, taking the same route he'd used to get to the Supers Association branch. Dark alleys. Moments later, Michael arrived at the hotel entrance, only to encounter a familiar face, or at least, somewhat familiar. It was a stretch to call it that since he'd only seen the man once about an hour ago. It was the man who happened to be staying in the room opposite his. As their eyes met, the man frowned, though he quickly masked it with a polite smile. Michael, however, had already noticed the initial reaction. What puzzled him more was the faint hostility he sensed, not from the middle-aged man but from his companion beside him. Even more intriguing was the familiar aura emanating from the other person. Two supernaturals. Michael murmured to himself. He wasn't surprised to learn he shared the hotel with at least two other supernaturals. Supernaturals were still human, after all, just more adept at hiding themselves from the average society while continuing to live their lives. It wasn't unusual to see supernaturals in public, though Michael rarely encountered them. Before his advancement to rank 1, he wouldn't have even noticed if a supernatural passed him, unless he used detect, which he had stopped doing after his unnerving experience with Brian. Now, however, with his advancement, everything about him had improved, including aspects not shown on the status panel. Michael no longer needed detect to recognize a supernatural being, as long as they weren't far stronger than him and had excellent control over their mana and aura. At the moment, though, none of this mattered. What puzzled Michael was the faint hostility he'd sensed earlier from the companion of the man he'd met an hour ago. It didn't make any sense. The hostility had disappeared as quickly as it appeared, but Michael trusted his instincts. His senses weren't playing tricks on him. Despite his confusion, Michael didn't linger. After returning a polite nod to the man from earlier and briefly greeting the companion, who, for some reason, greeted him first, Michael continued on his way. At least, that's how it appeared on the surface. The moment Michael reached a secluded corner, he leaned his back against the wall and exhaled slowly. Without hesitation, he connected his consciousness to the land of origin. When he opened his eyes in the other world, he was seated cross-legged, exactly as he had been before returning to the real world. Wasting no time, Michael turned to the two undead perched on his shoulders. On his right was the undead phantom Morpho, the only one of its kind under his command, which he had named Blue. On his left sat the undead spicebush swallowtail moth, another unique undead, Purple. With a quick glance at both, Michael stored them in his mark of origin. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes again and reconnected with the real world. Barely a few seconds had passed. Nothing appeared to have changed. Michael scanned his surroundings, confirming no one was paying attention. Discreetly, he stretched out his palms, summoning the two undead he had just stored. They hovered silently above his hands. What was Michael doing? Initially, he had planned to mind his own business, but something about those two men felt off, deeply suspicious. Yet even that wouldn't have been enough for him to act. It wasn't until he passed them earlier that he realized why their auras felt so familiar. It was a sensation Michael knew intimately, ever since his first undead. The energy of death. While Michael wasn't one to equate death energy with evil, he himself wielded it. However, something about the death energy surrounding those two was deeply unsettling. It felt ominous, resentful. Also, it was like the moment he finally recognized the energy seemed to call out to him. Michael wasn't sure, but a part of him knew he had heard several voices called out to him in an instant. Die. For the first time since his awakening, Michael felt the true workings of his class, the abilities not listed on his status panel. Idiot! Were you trying to alert him? The older of the two men snapped angrily as soon as they stepped outside the hotel. He clearly seemed to be the leader. Sorry, the second man replied meekly, his head lowered. I couldn't help myself. We're finally so close to our goal, and seeing a variable like that made me lose my composure for a moment. The older man's scowl deepened, his breathing heavy with restrained frustration. He took a moment to compose himself before speaking. That boy is not any weaker than us, he said firmly. I was surprised, too, when I encountered him outside our rooms. He's the one responsible for that earlier disturbance. I don't know why his mana signature is so similar to the man the higher-ups assigned us, nor why he doesn't bother fully suppressing his mana. But listen to me, he's a strong variable. Didn't I tell you to be cautious around him? I'm sorry, the other man murmured again, guilt evident in his tone. Just be careful. I know how excited you are about advancing and your hatred for these so-called modern cultivators who choose to be controlled like lambs instead of reigning as kings. But tonight is critical. We can't afford any mistakes. Understand? I understand, the second man said quietly. But still, that boy. He looks so young yet so powerful. Do you think he's an awakener? I doubt it. He seems too old. If he were an awakener, someone his age would be able to crush us effortlessly. I wouldn't have even sensed his mana unless he wanted me to. It's better not to dwell on it. He's likely just some prodigy from a powerful force. More like a Dragonhan's prodigy, the other man muttered under his breath. Whatever he is, he's none of our business, the leader replied coldly. Besides, he'll be dead soon enough. The two men didn't even consider the possibility that Michael was one of the rare new Awakeners who had recently passed their ceremony. Unlike Grace, who worked within the Supers Association, these men were clueless. But even Grace had thought of Michael's progress to be extremely fast. To the two duo, however, Michael was simply a strong youth with a vaguely familiar aura. Chapter 112, Trailing the Suspicious Duo. Death was often associated with evil, treated as though it were inherently bad. But it wasn't. To put it simply, it was just another part of life. All things eventually came to an end. Even immortality was a fallacy. Unless, of course, one was a true god. Of course, such lofty philosophy was far from Michael's current understanding. Even as a necromancer, he still viewed death as a bad thing. A true practitioner of death would embrace it fully. Then again, that was a true practitioner. Anyone could practice something and excel at it, but grasping its true essence was rare. Without systematic training or mentorship, almost everything Michael knew about the supernatural was self-taught. Even now, he wasn't certain if death energy was the correct term, but sensing the familiar aura between him and those two men made it feel appropriate. Michael had read on forums that the panel only Awakeners could see served more as a summary of one's abilities than a comprehensive list. Now, he fully understood a part of it, because nowhere on the forum did it mention that an Awakener Necromancer could hear voices from something as ethereal as energy. Why does their energy feel so evil? In truth, Michael already had an inkling of why that might be the case. He simply didn't want to accept it. Both Michael's, the one from Earth and the one from this world, though the former was more experienced in life, hadn't encountered truly dark forces. Almost all supernaturals had blood on their hands, partly from slaying monsters, which meant nearly all of them carried a trace of death energy. This imbued them with a unique presence that other supernaturals could sense. However, as a necromancer, Michael was more attuned to certain energies than even those stronger than him, which was the reason this time the energy surrounding those two supernaturals stood outweigh more to him, as it was different. Despite his inner tremors, Michael proceeded with his plan. Undead Phantom Morpho LV2. Rank Common. Undead Spicebush Swallowtail Moth LV2. Rank Common. Just as the panel didn't reveal the full capabilities of an Awakener, it often fell short when assessing monsters. Take Michael's Spectralant, for example. One would be in serious trouble if they approached it assuming the panel showed all it was capable of, only to be met with its two-tone strength. The same applied to his Undead Phantom Morpho and Undead Spicebush Swallowtail Moth. Both were illusionary creatures that seemed like illusions themselves even without using their skills. Of course, with their current strength, it was relatively easy for a powerful supernatural to detect them despite their racial abilities. However, the key was whether that supernatural cared enough to pay attention. In this scenario, the weakness of the two undead became Michael's strength, or rather, his perfect tools for spying on the suspicious ones. The small size of the Undead Phantom Morpho and the Undead Spicebush Swallowtail Moth was also a significant advantage. Go! Michael commanded the two undead, and they flew away from him towards the hotel building's exit, which also served as the entrance. Strangely, although the two flying undead were small in size, much like butterflies, when they paused in front of someone, it seemed as if they couldn't be seen, creating an eerie situation. The moment the two undead left him, Michael activated his skill, Share Senses, without hesitation. At its basic mastery, the skill allowed him to link to the senses of two undead within a 100-meter radius, which suited him perfectly. His current abilities only let him control undead within a 300-meter range, and the farther they were, the weaker his control became. For now, 100 meters was the sweet spot, assuming the targets remained within range. Those two are strong, Michael thought as his senses flared. However, he didn't feel an overwhelming threat. He estimated that he could handle either one individually, but taking them both down at once would be a challenge. Not that it mattered. Michael was never the type to fight solo. He was a necromancer, an exceptional one at that. The Undead Phantom Morpho and Undead Spicebush Swallowtail Moth flitted out of the hotel, with Michael trailing behind them. Relying on his enhanced senses to navigate, he moved as though he could see everything clearly. His previous runs to and from the Supers Association branch had taught him how much he could trust his senses. His sensory perception was sharpest within a 20-meter radius, and for day-to-day use, this was more than enough. Although this was his first time using his senses in such a scenario, he wielded the ability as naturally as if he'd been born with it. By moving in sync with his undead, Michael ensured he stayed within the optimal range where Share Senses all worked seamlessly. It had been more than 200 years since the Dark Age, when monsters reigned and demonic supernaturals ran rampant. Now, 2 centuries later, the world was far more at peace and had even surpassed its pre-Dark Age state in terms of technological and societal advancement, or so most people in Aurora believed. However, only a select few knew the truth. The dangers of the past hadn't disappeared. If anything, they had grown stronger. Most ordinary citizens didn't even know what a demonic cultivator was. This ignorance was largely due to the Federation's efforts to keep such matters under wraps, often attributing incidents involving demonic cultivators to sudden cracks or crack outbreaks, much to the frustration of the demonic faction. Even after 200 years, Aurora remained divided into 3 main factions: the righteous faction, the demonic faction, and the neutral faction. However, in reality, Traces of each faction could be found within the others. The Federation was the public representative of the righteous faction. Though primarily focused on protecting the innocent and maintaining order, some members secretly engaged in practices considered morally gray. The demonic faction, despite its foundation in chaos and the pursuit of power through darker means, had individuals who adopted more moderate methods. Some even harbored twisted yet righteous tendencies. The neutral faction, dedicated to maintaining balance, often housed individuals with personal ties to both the righteous and demonic factions. These crossovers made the political landscape of Aurora complex and fraught with hidden agendas. All of this was far removed from Michael's current concerns. His future remained unpredictable, but tonight would mark the first time he dabbled in the deep waters of his new world. If there was one thing demonic cultivators sought, it was power, and the freedom to wield it and get it without restraint. They saw themselves as superior beings, destined to rule, submitting only to the stronger fist. Yet, they lived worse than the weak they so despised. Since their emergence, demonic supernaturals had been suppressed repeatedly, their struggle resembling that of hyenas against lions. However, after years of suppression and enduring defeat, they were finally ready to return in force. It took Michael some time to adjust to the vision of his undead phantom morpho and spicebush swallowtail moth. Though still limited to a monochrome world, connecting to their sight felt like viewing the world in 360 degrees through countless cameras. The dual connection made it even more disorienting. Fortunately, Michael's high intelligence provided him with the computational power to handle it. After a while, he managed to make sense of the dual vision filled with multiple angels. Fortunately, it seemed the suspicious duo's activities were confined to the hotel's surroundings, not far away. If they truly intended to leave, Michael knew there was little he could do to stop them. Following the duo, Michael studied their movements to try and discern what they planned to do. He quickly noticed something odd. Almost every few meters, the two dropped an odd-looking object on the floor in a specific pattern. When Michael first saw it, he quickly used Detect on the oddly shaped item that looked like a stone. Demon remains. A remnant of the flesh of a low-level demon. Demon remains. The two items together didn't seem like a good thing. What was worse was that in his hesitation to find out whether he should pick up whatever it was in front of him, the remains of the demon seemed to dissolve into the ground and disappeared. It didn't only happen once. As Michael continued to trail after the suspicious individuals, the same experience he had with the first one made Michael feel a little scared yet very apprehensive towards touching the demon remains. It didn't really seem like a bright idea to touch them, but it also didn't seem like a good idea to let those to continue, as it didn't seem like they were up to good things. At least, he didn't see anything good from their actions. Throwing some sort of monster remains was enough suspicion that these two were definitely not doing community service. However, stopping them in public, even at night when there were still quite a number of people on the road, and even without this, a larger number of people residing in the buildings around them, might lead to a fight that would cause public destruction, which was something Michael didn't want. For a moment, he was conflicted. Chapter 113 Impending Doom. Mid-thought, an idea suddenly struck Michael. No, a realization. What am I even doing? Isn't the association responsible for handling supernatural affairs? For a moment, Michael felt stupid. It was clear that even with enhanced cognitive abilities, high mental processing power didn't equate to perfect intelligence. Then again, smart was a subjective term. Not everyone could have handled the current situation as well as Michael did, even if they had better resources. After the realization hit him that he was concerning himself with matters far outside his paycheck, something he didn't even have, Michael immediately pulled out his phone. He had a new plan: to inform the association. The Supers Association had its own hotline, with each branch maintaining specific numbers. However, like most regular people, Michael hadn't memorized it. If it wasn't the police hotline, it wasn't exactly common knowledge. Okay, that wasn't entirely true. Michael could have easily searched for the number online, but instead, he scrolled through his contacts for one person who would reached out to him earlier that day. Grace. She had called him about his advancement, and since they weren't familiar enough for personal calls, she must have used one of the association's official lines. Besides, it was easy to distinguish between regular contacts and those that weren't. Trailing behind the suspicious duo through dark alleyways, Michael did his best to suppress his presence, sweat trickling down his back. He located the contact and dialed it. Ring. Ring. The call connected almost instantly. A calm yet serious male voice came through the line. Hello, this is the Supers Association. Who am I speaking with? And how can I help you today? Good morning. I'm Michael Norman, and I have something to report, Michael said in a low, measured tone. Please, go ahead. There are 2 men staying at the hotel I'm lodged in. I wasn't trying to meddle in anyone's business, but something about them seemed off. When I followed them, I found them handling what looked like demon remains. The remains dissolved into the ground, and they continued this in a structured pattern. I didn't know what else to do, so I called. Wait, demon remains? Yes. And how do you know that? The voice grew skeptical but also more serious. I'm an awakener. It's one of my skills. I see. And you say the remains are dissolving into the ground? Yes. This sounds beyond my jurisdiction. Please hold for a moment. I'll be right back. The man's voice became hurried, and Michael could hear rapid movement in the background. Before he could respond, the line went quiet. Michael sighed. The reaction only confirmed what he already suspected. This wasn't a simple matter. Demons? His tone changed as soon as I mentioned it. What's really going on here? He muttered. Before he could think further, a different voice came through the phone, one he instantly recognized. Speak. Repeat what you just said. Teacher Brian. Michael was taken aback. It was indeed the voice of Brian from the trade center. You. Brian sounded equally surprised but quickly returned to his usual businesslike tone. Where are you? Michael described the hotel and its surroundings, providing as much detail as possible. Although the suspicious duo had moved away, the hotel remained the most recognizable landmark. Once Michael finished, the call abruptly ended, leaving him stunned. What now? He muttered, unsure of his next move. He was about to link his vision back to his undead when a voice suddenly spoke beside him. This is quite a good hiding spot. Michael's heart jumped, and his body reacted instinctively. He swung his hand toward the source of the voice, but it was caught effortlessly with a force that nullified any power it had. Good instincts, the voice said calmly, but poor form and terrible strength distribution, probably due to having so much. Michael's eyelid twitched as he turned to see who it was. You are fast, Teacher Brian. Brian nodded slightly, releasing his grip on Michael's wrist. Emichimum. Brian turned his head slightly, scanning the area like he was searching for something specific. Michael noticed him fixating on the direction where the suspicious men had headed, the same direction where his undead were trailing them. No wonder we couldn't locate them for long. They're using advanced aura suppression arts. You'd have to get quite close to detect the subtle differences, Brian muttered aloud. Michael listened intently. He knew what arts were in the cultivation world, techniques that utilized one's mana to produce various effects. From Brian's words, Michael understood that the 2 men were likely bad people, given their actions and reliance on aura-hiding techniques. How did you manage to find them when our men couldn't? Brian asked, his tone curious. Michael hesitated, confused about why they weren't pursuing the suspects immediately. Their aura. It felt very ominous. Ominous. In what way? It felt resentful. The death energy around them didn't seem like something you'd get just from killing monsters. Brian narrowed his eyes. That depends. After all, not every monster comes from a crack. Ah. Michael blinked, puzzled by the cryptic response. Just continue, Brian urged, his tone brisk. Michael adjusted his thoughts before speaking. The death energy around them, he began, pausing under Brian's intense, unreadable gaze. It spoke, and for some reason, I knew it didn't come from monsters. It came from humans. Yes. Then they're demonic cultivators. Michael's eyes widened in shock. He'd suspected something dark about the duo but didn't dare to conclude. Now, learning they were part of a group responsible for nationwide crises and mass sacrifices to centuries ago left him shaken. Brian didn't give him time to dwell on the revelation. Interesting method you've got there. But don't be too quick to assume someone's guilty just because of what you sense. As an awakener, I'm guessing your class allows you to detect certain things others can't, but it still depends on you to discern what and what is actually as it seems. Michael frowned. But you just said they're demonic cultivators. Isn't it possible you are wrong? Oh, I'm not wrong. Brian raised his hand toward the sky, and Michael, puzzled, followed his gaze. What he saw made his breath catch. The sky was riddled with cracks. Familiar cracks Michael couldn't be any more familiar with. They were dimensional cracks. And looking at their appearance, they were corrupted type cracks. Worse, their corrupted edges tinged with a faint red glow. A clear sign of an impending crack break. To think, even after all our efforts, they'd still succeed. Those damned demons, Brian muttered bitterly. Can't we stop it? As long as nothing comes out, there's still a chance, right? Michael asked, his voice tinged with urgency. He wasn't naive. He didn't know why cracks would suddenly appear in the sky, but he understood the stakes. If those cracks broke, half the city, if not the entire city, would fall. The chaotic energy in the sky intensified, growing from a faint hum to levels surpassing what Michael had felt even near a level to crack. Michael hastily linked his senses to his undead phantom, Morpho, and his undead spicebush swallowtail moth. His heart sunk as he saw what they had discovered. The two men had activated a magic circle in a secluded alley while Michael was distracted, speaking with the association. It was obvious everything had been planned in advance, and Michael hadn't been able to stop it. No wonder Brian hadn't bothered chasing them. It was already too late. There's nothing you can do to stop a dimensional crack from opening, except. Michael interjected sharply, desperation evident in his voice. Brian wasn't offended. Instead, for the first time, Michael saw a clear expression on the man's face, one of yearning. Except if you were a god, Brian said quietly. Stopping a crack, it's a natural disaster. To go against nature, you'd need to be as strong as it. Michael fell silent, his mind racing. If there were a god in Woodstone City, they would have already stopped this. He also didn't ask why Brian was so calm in the face of catastrophe. Michael had his own guilt and worries to bear. Guilt for not acting sooner and fear for his family. The cracks in the sky stretched so much he could tell they were already dangerously close to the area where his aunt and cousin lived. For a moment, Michael felt paralyzed by the weight of it all. Then Brian's voice broke through his thoughts. You might feel guilty for not acting sooner, but your actions wouldn't have changed much. Even if you'd stopped those two, you'd have only delayed a few cracks or prevented a handful of stronger monsters from appearing. The outcome would still be the same. Brian's eyes narrowed, his tone sharp. If you want to blame someone, blame the Federation. As the two conversed, the streets gradually filled with people. The sight in the sky was impossible to miss. The previously dark streets lit up as residents emerged from their homes, drawn by the ominous spectacle above. Phones were whipped out, their cameras capturing the cracks spreading across the heavens. Michael watched it all unfold, a sinking feeling settling in his chest. He partly understood something then. This city was halfway doomed. Chapter 114 Preparations. When Brian mentioned blaming the Federation, he was specifically referring to their failure to stop and apprehend the culprits before the situation escalated to this point. Being a man of few words, he didn't bother explaining further, leaving Michael to interpret his meaning on his own. On Michael's side, his emotions grew more tangled as he observed the growing crowd on the streets. What frustrated him most was how, despite the evident panic, people seemed more focused on recording the spectacle and posting it online. These people clearly had no grasp of the imminent danger they faced, having been so heavily sheltered by the Federation. Their survival instinct were practically non-existent, worse than those of a chicken, Michael thought grimly. Not long ago, he had been just like them. Only after becoming a supernatural did he finally see a crack with his own eyes. Ironically, despite cracks being such a significant part and history of the world, their dangers were never truly emphasized, not even in textbooks. Monsters were only depicted in textbooks, and even then, the images were neither detailed nor terrifying. They were often presented as simple black-and-white diagrams, used as mere examples rather than true representations of the horrors they posed. Had these people understood the horrors that lurked behind the cracks, perhaps they'd be rushing to evacuate rather than creating what would likely be their last memories in this world. Michael had his own worries to focus on. His family. Brian's voice came back again and broke through his thoughts. The cracks won't fully open for another 20 minutes or so. That's just enough time to appreciate being alive. Prepare yourself, boy. This will be your first major trial as a warrior of the Federation. Michael noticed the yearning in Brian's voice vanish, replaced by his usual composed tone. And don't worry about those two. I'll handle them. Knowing their type, they'll definitely try something to make the chaos worse. Do your best to survive. You could run, but if you do, you'll be branded a traitor to the Federation, someone who abandoned their responsibilities. Trust me, you won't like the consequences. Brian paused for a moment, then added with a strange finality, seems like a new era is about to begin. With that, Brian vanished, leaving Michael to his spiraling thoughts. Shaking off his daze, Michael quickly connected his vision to that of his undead, wanting to see the suspicious duo tied to this madness. However, what he saw was a fading magic circle. There was no sign of the culprits. Teacher Brian must have taken them, Michael realized, and he'd done so effortlessly. Michael stopped bothering about that matter. Without wasting another second, Michael left the alley and reappeared near the duo's last known location. He then swiftly retrieved his undead into his storage space. With nothing else to do at this place and the looming threat of the cracks breaking in the sky, Michael had only one thing left to do: go to his family. He never thought he'd be rushing home because of something like this. Just as he turned to leave, his phone vibrated in his pocket. The constant buzzing made it clear it wasn't just a text. Continue reading on Empire. Michael felt a flash of impatience, tempted to ignore the call, but in the end, he pulled out his phone. The caller ID surprised him. It was his aunt. Michael's hand trembled as he answered immediately. Aunt Mia. Michael, are you okay? Can you come home now? It's not safe outside. Michael, please, come home. He could hear the desperation in her voice, a tone that pierced his heart. Aunt Mia wasn't just his aunt. She was the only maternal figure he had ever known. After spending more than a decade together, from childhood to now, she was more like a mother. And Lily, her daughter, was a sister figure to him. Their bond had deepened over years of being a family of three. It was obvious his worry about them wasn't one-sided. Don't worry, Aunt Mia. I'm on my way. Just wait for me, Michael said softly, his voice steady as he tried to calm her down. Okay, but hurry. Okay, she pleaded. I will, Michael reassured her before the call ended. Hearing her voice eased his tension and renewed his resolve. Just as he was about to put the phone back in his pocket, another call came in. This time, the name on the screen made his breath hitch. It was another familiar person. Mira. Michael hesitated briefly, his gaze fixed on the cracks in the sky. The ominous red glow around them intensified, slowly painting the heavens crimson. With a deep breath, he answered the call. Are you seeing this, Jew? Mira's sharp voice cut straight to the point. I'm right under it, Michael replied, his tone grim. Do you know what's going on? She pressed, though her tone made it clear she wasn't expecting much of an answer. Unexpectedly, she got one. Yeah, it's demonic cultivators, Michael said bluntly, dropping the bomb without further explanation. Stay safe. It's about to get messy. We'll talk later if things go well. I need to be with my family. Without waiting for a response, Michael ended the call. At any other time, this would have been considered rude, even disrespectful, but right now, he couldn't care less. With a deep breath and a face devoid of emotion, Michael disappeared from the spot. A while later. Knock. Knock. Who's there? A cautious voice called from behind the door. It's me, Aunt Mia. It's Michael. He could hear hurried footsteps approaching, and soon the door swung open, revealing Aunt Mia's tired face. Behind her, Lily peeked out, curiosity and worry written all over her young features. I'm back, Michael said, forcing a smile. On Mira's side, her face twitched as the call with Michael abruptly ended. That guy, she thought bitterly. Her hands clenched at her sides as she resisted the urge to curse out loud. Still, she couldn't ignore what Michael had said before cutting her off. His family. Mira turned a glance at her mother, who was staring out the window, her eyes fixed on the ominous cracks in the sky. Mira couldn't quite put it into words, but ever since her awakening, she had noticed subtle changes in her mother. She seemed to be regaining the cheerfulness she had lost after Mira's father's death, as if awakening had brought hope back into their lives. Mira didn't want that to stop. A determined expression settled on her face as she picked up her phone and dialed a number. The call connected immediately. Lillian. Chapter 115 Thoughts. After talking with Aunt Mia for a while, Michael realized she had sent him a message earlier. Unfortunately, it was around the time he had been busy in the land of origin, so there was no way he could have seen it. He hadn't even bothered to check for any missed calls or messages after returning to the real world, heading straight to the association to sell the corpses he had collected. When Michael finally looked at the message, he saw it was about the money he had sent her. As expected, Aunt Mia had overreacted, or rather, reacted appropriately, to him suddenly transferring such a large amount at once. Checking his call log, Michael saw he also had a couple of missed calls from her before she had decided to send the message instead. Michael felt a twinge of guilt, but there was nothing he could do about the past. It wasn't that he had intentionally ignored her, he had simply been too occupied at the time. The content of the message was exactly what one would expect from a worried guardian. How did you get the money? Are you safe? Are you in trouble? Call me when you see this. Why did you send so much money? She had essentially rephrased the same concerns several times. However, unlike what Michael expected, that Aunt Mia would calm down after seeing him and start asking various questions, she didn't. Instead, her first question was about what was going on. In her mind, she didn't expect much of an answer from Michael. After all, he had only been an Awakener for barely 5 days. That was hardly enough time to make significant connections or understand the intricacies of supernatural events, let alone something as monumental as this. This was her thought process, which wasn't illogical. Even someone as ordinary as Aunt Mia could tell that the situation with the sky wasn't normal and had to be significant. But despite recognizing this, she wasn't particularly worried. In her mind, she believed the Federation would handle everything. Like most people, she thought the same way. If the sky falls, There's always someone taller to hold it up. And she wasn't entirely wrong. The Federation was strong, more than capable of handling a myriad of crises. However, even a strong man could be caught off guard by a sudden blow. The Federation oversaw the entire Aurora realm. There was bound to be loopholes in their concentration. Michael didn't think the current issue would be too much for the association to handle. But from Brian's words, he knew everything had escalated far too quickly. Still, he held onto the hope that the Federation would be able to resolve the impending doom. It shouldn't take someone strong long to reach here, but the demonic cultivators must know that too. There was no way they would orchestrate something like this and allow the Federation to resolve it so easily. For a group that had managed to fight a behemoth like the Federation for over 2 centuries, they had to have their own means. Even someone as strong as Teacher Brian had spoken with such grave seriousness about the current situation, his words implying that the Federation might not intervene in time. Michael knew he had to prepare himself to face the crisis. If someone as powerful as Brian had little room for relaxation, there was no reason for someone as weak as Michael to feel at ease. Your next read is at Empire, but that was his burden to bear. His family didn't need to worry about such things. His duty was to protect them in any way he could. I don't know what's going on, Aunt Mia, but don't move too far from me. The Federation should be able to handle this. Aunt Mia nodded. Michael's response was exactly what she had expected. As for the part about staying close to him, she saw no issue with it. It had been her plan all along. Michael simply reiterating it only reinforced her resolve. Though she doubted Michael had become extraordinarily strong in such a short time, he was still a supernatural, and it made sense to stay by his side. With that, the family gathered in the sitting room. Aunt Mia turned on the television, switching channels to find any news covering the current situation, while Michael stood by the window, observing the sky. The chaotic mixture of energies above hadn't changed much. Michael could now distinguish energy levels comparable to the level 1 crack he had been to, the Goblin world, and others like the level 2 crack he had ventured into, the Ape region. However, these were smaller and closer to the ground compared to the massive cracks in the sky. Judging by the frequency of their chaotic energy, Michael could sense they'd be the first to break, releasing monsters. And it wouldn't take long. Can't I just run away with Aunt Mia and Lily? Michael thought. With my undead, it shouldn't be too hard to escape before the cracks fully break. The thought left a slight bitter taste in his mouth. It felt a little cruel to him to discard everyone else, even as he had the power to help a little. Yet, he couldn't deny he wasn't entirely against the idea. Michael only felt a twinge of guilt, not true remorse for leaving others behind. Another thing the pre-awakening him would feel different about. However, Brian's parting words still lingered in his mind. If he fled, he would be branded a fugitive alongside his family. As much as he wanted to be selfish, his actions would have consequences for his loved ones. And that alone kept him from acting on the thought. That, and the possibility his family wouldn't even agree to leave. Though he'd only recently begun learning the truth about the world, Michael didn't need much time to understand the situation of the humans living in Aurora. Even now, with cracks forming in the sky, people were still out on the streets, laughing, taking photos, and treating the disaster like a spectacle. Michael could already predict the outcome. Chapter 116 Chaos Erupts. The Dawn of the Dark Age. It said that on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, cracks of various sizes suddenly appeared in the sky, causing mass panic worldwide. These cracks weren't just anomalies. They became portals from which monsters poured out, wreaking havoc and destruction. Michael knew the historical accounts well, both from school and from forum discussions. But the current situation felt different. For one, he believed people back then had sharper survival instincts, reacting swiftly to the unknown anomaly. Secondly, according to records, the highest level cracks during the dawn of the Dark Age were only level 2, and even those were rare. It wasn't until much later that stronger cracks began to appear. Now, as Michael assessed the chaotic energy radiating from the sky, he could sense at least level 2 cracks in his vicinity, along with multiple level 1s. He wasn't overly concerned about the level 1 or 2 cracks. He might not be able to protect the entire neighborhood, but he could certainly shield his family. At this point, Michael had stopped feeling guilt about the issue with the suspicious duo earlier. Looking at how it seemed like the entire city was covered in these cracks, there was really nothing he could do except make the final result slightly better. What worried him were the cracks above level 2, the ones farther from the ground. Though Michael's understanding of power levels among Awakeners and cultivators was still shaky, he doubted he could handle a level 4 crack on his own. He figured that, with Lucky and Prince by his side, a level 3 might be manageable, but even that wasn't guaranteed. Crack monsters were different from regular monsters, with their overwhelming numbers being their most dangerous trait. Yet, those cracks weren't his primary concern. The Federation and the Association were tasked with handling such large-scale threats. As Michael watched the cracks near the ground turn a deeper red, the people outside finally began to sense the danger and grew visibly uneasy. His thoughts raced. Isn't it said that aside from the initial cracks at the start of the apocalypse, cracks naturally formed due to negative energy? But all these cracks were caused by demonic cultivators. Or is it one of those natural disasters triggered by human actions? More pressing was whether he could boost his strength at the last minute. The only viable method was to use his evolution points. Unfortunately, Michael wasn't in a position to leave the original world for the land of origin. Closing his eyes for even a second could result in waking up to a monster inside his apartment. More importantly, leaving would endanger not only his family but also himself, as his body would remain defenseless while he was in the land of origin, a glaring weakness for Awakeners at his level. It was said that this vulnerability diminished at higher ranks, but such knowledge was far beyond Michael's reach. Thankfully, before leaving the land of origin earlier, Michael had summoned all the undead he could dismiss back into the netherworld. The only ones left behind were either newly revived, unevolved, or unable to be summoned yet. At least this happened after I equipped my undead. That thought gave Michael some solace, though he knew it was the least of his concerns. Still, a part of him was relieved that he wouldn't have to summon a bunch of naked corpses in front of his aunt and cousin. Just as that faintly amusing thought crossed his mind, Michael's phone vibrated. In a daze, he pulled it out and saw a notification. It was a message from the Association. Urgent. Monsters are emerging from cracks in the city. Every supernatural is mandated to protect the public. Non-compliance will result in severe punishment. Repeat. All Federation-affiliated supernaturals in Woodstone City must safeguard the public from immediate threats. Free use of ability in public is permitted. May the will of Aurora live for 1,000,000 years. As Michael finished reading the message, a sudden shout echoed from outside the apartment, drawing his attention, and that of his aunt and cousin. Look, something's coming out of that crack. Michael cursed under his breath. The sight of a crack alone should have been enough to keep anyone inside. Even without knowing about monster-infested cracks, as one wouldn't know what it looked like until one saw it, a knowledge reserved for supernaturals, basic survival instincts should have kicked in. Michael turned toward the direction of the shout. A couple stood outside, the woman pointing at a specific crack in the sky. Michael followed her gesture, his eyes narrowing. Then he froze. Emerging slowly from the crack were small, green figures. The couple, hindered by the dim light, couldn't make out the details, but Michael could. His sharp eyes caught the unmistakable sight of green hands clawing their way out of the rift. What's that? Michael heard Lily's voice beside him as she tried to squeeze past him for a better view. Michael wasn't about to let that happen. With a firm grip, he pulled her back and spoke in a calm but commanding tone. His cold green eyes sent a chill down Lily's spine, The first time her cousin had ever unsettled her like this. "Stay here and don't move. Yuju, Aunt Mia." His voice was soft yet authoritative, leaving both of them in a daze. They nodded instinctively. Michael turned his attention back outside. By now, it had finally dawned on the crowd that staying outside was a terrible idea, and people began rushing indoors. But it was too late. The full appearance of the green figures came into view as they plummeted from the sky. Some crashed into the ground, breaking limbs and leaving pools of blood. Others landed directly on fleeing civilians, crushing them on impact. The chaos escalated. Some of the green creatures survived with broken limbs. Others were cushioned by their companions, emerging in better shape. Hundreds of these figures rained down, filling the surroundings with screams and carnage. It felt as the hell had descended on Aurora. Chapter 117 Going out to help. Hell had truly descended, even for Aunt Mia and Lily, who weren't part of the chaos outside. They had just turned ahead toward the sitting room, following Michael's instructions, when the horrifying scene stopped them dead in their tracks. "Monsters! Blood! They are dead! They are dead!" Lily's voice faltered as she stumbled backward, her broken sentences growing shriller with each word. She stepped away from the window and panicked but lost her footing and fell hard to the floor, her cries cutting off abruptly. "Shit!" Michael cursed under his breath, momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected the damage that would be caused by the creatures emerging from the cracks to be easy to resolve, but what he hadn't foreseen was the sudden appearance and the sheer number that followed. Not only had multiple cracks opened simultaneously, but the monsters poured out rapidly. Level 1 cracks most times had at least 100 from each crack. Even if they emerged in at a time, it was overwhelming. In the brief moment of shock, Michael had already seen several people die, their bodies crushed or torn apart before they could even react. He clenched his fists. He couldn't let this continue. Though he found himself growing more detached emotionally, he wasn't completely numb. Watching so many die right in front of him stirred something within, a mix of frustration and anger. But his family came first. Always. Lily lay on the floor, grimacing in pain, her ankle twisted at a slightly odd angle. She'd badly sprained it during her fall. Aunt Mia knelt beside her, trembling but trying to comfort her daughter. "Michael, close the window. We need to lock the doors. The windows, everything." Aunt Mia struggled to speak, her voice trembling as if she might burst into tears at any moment. Yet, despite her fear, she clung to a facade of strength. Her body trembled as she tried to pull Michael away from the window to lock it herself. But even if Michael hadn't awakened, moving him would have been a tall order. And now? It was impossible. Michael stood firm, unmoving, his gaze fixed outside. "Why aren't you, Sniff, moving?" she whimpered, her voice cracking. "Those things, they might find us." The dam broke. Aunt Mia's tears streamed down her face, and she began to sob quietly. Lily, lying on the floor, wasn't faring much better. Tears streaked her cheeks, but the pain in her leg and the instinct to stay silent stifled her cries. The horrifying sight of monsters and humans being crushed to death had clearly left a heavy mark on them. Michael's heart ached at the sight of his family in such despair, but he had no time to console them. While Aunt Mia focused on locking up the house, Michael's sharp gaze remained on the chaos outside. Now, he could see some people attempting to fight back against the monsters that poured from the cracks. Some of them were ordinary humans or old knight apprentices who had failed to ignite their life seeds yet had pushed their bodies to the human limit. Others moved with blinding speed, clearly strong supernaturals. But it was a losing battle. The sheer number of monsters far outstripped the handful of defenders, and the chaos only continued to grow. If things were going to improve, Michael knew he had to act. Initially, Michael had only intended to intervene because he couldn't just sit by and watch people die. He wasn't so cold as to ignore the situation entirely. Sending out one of his undead would have also been enough to fulfill the Supernaturals Association's mandatory participation request. But as he watched other supernaturals slaying the monsters, a new thought crossed his mind. Experience points. He hadn't considered this before. He focused on the chaos unfolding. Now, with the chaos fully unleashed, his mind shifted. Even if he didn't care about the people, he could do it for the sake of gaining more experience. In the end, his actions would still save lives. At this moment, thoughts of the academy were the last thing on Michael's mind. Like many other Awakeners, he was consumed by the pursuit of power, or more like the obsession of leveling up. "Stay here, Aunt Mia. It's not safe outside," Michael said firmly. "Lock everything, like you just mentioned, and don't let anyone in, no matter who they are." Mia opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat as Michael stretched out his hand. A large figure clad in black armor, wielding an oversized hammer, materialized before her, its imposing form nearly touching the ceiling. Though its face was hidden, the sheer presence of the figure felt like a beast staring her down. Mia stood frozen, her mind a flurry of questions. What was happening outside was terrifying enough, but now she wanted answers about the strange, witchcraft-like magic circle that had appeared in her home, summoning this monstrous figure. Beginning, Michael commanded the undead, "Protect her and her. Remember, protect them both. Nothing, absolutely nothing, must happen to them." He kept the instructions simple. Terms like aunt or cousin might complicate the command, so he avoided them altogether. Satisfied, Michael turned back and drew a weapon he hadn't touched since his awakening, one of his first purchases. A dagger. When Michael first awakened, the initial weapons he bought before entering the land of origin were three: a gun, a spear, and a dagger. Of the three, only the dagger remained relatively unused. Occasionally, in moments of idle thought, Michael had considered selling or discarding it. But now, here it was, about to be handed to his aunt. It was one of the worst weapons for supernaturals, but for an ordinary person, it was far better than a kitchen knife. "Aunt Mia, please take this," Michael said, pressing the dagger into her hand. "You probably won't need it with my undead here, but just in case. I'll be back soon. Don't leave unless absolutely necessary." He didn't give her a chance to refuse, placing the weapon firmly in her grasp before turning to Lily, who had stopped crying. Her gaze shifted between Beginning's massive form and her injured leg. A mix of surprise and pain etched on her face. "Be careful, okay?" Michael said softly, crouching beside her. "Don't move too much because of your leg. Listen to Aunt Mia and stay close to this big guy. He'll keep you both safe." Lily nodded, and Michael gave her a reassuring smile. "Michael," Aunt Mia began, but before she could finish, Michael had already leaped out of the window. Chapter 118 First Wave. There was no dramatic, ground-shattering landing. How could there be when Michael had only jumped from his second-floor apartment? If it had been a skyscraper, perhaps such theatrics would have been justified. A cracked ground would have signaled that Michael had put too much force into the landing, an overzealous use of strength or pure vanity. But in a situation where a massacre was unfolding, who was there to impress? Monsters? The dying? Corpses? Michael didn't want to waste even a moment. The instant his feet hit the ground, he summoned his weapon from the storage space. In a fluid motion, effortlessly decapitated three green-skinned creatures charging toward him. The green figures weren't unfamiliar to Michael. Hobgoblins and goblins, with the latter appearing in greater numbers. The goblins, he had hunted himself in the level 1 crack, the goblin world, and brought from the association from the real world. The hobgoblins, however, were creatures he hadn't seen in the real world or in the land of origin, but thanks to the evolution of his talent, he had been able to evolve his 1-star undead goblin to 3-star common rank hobgoblin, making him quite familiar with them. Their presence only confirmed his earlier theory. There existed an evolutionary path for the monsters in nature. Unfortunately, the monsters now were all high levels. Hobgoblin LV11. Rank. Common. Goblin LV6. Rank. Common. Goblin LV5. A rank. Common. For weaker supernaturals, these creatures would be deadly. But to Michael, they were nothing more than experience points that were waiting to be harvested by his spear. Venomfang Spear. Rank. Rare. Type. Poison Spear. Inflicts a potent poison on the target, dealing continuous damage over time and weakening their defenses. The spear's razor-sharp edge was as deadly as its venomous bite. Michael wasn't planning to idly stand by while these experience points, monsters, continued their rampage. Drawing on his mana reserves, he activated his summoning skill. Greenish-black circles appeared around him, and moments later, towering figures emerged from the void. Michael could summon a total of 12 undead from the netherworld. 3 wolves, 1 ape, and 8 orcs. With beginning, the first goblin he had evolved. Guarding his family, Michael called forth 9 more. His summoned army consisted of a verdant wolf, 5 male orcs, 3 female orcs, and a blue-furred ape. Each one of them was a 1-star raring creature, their power rivaling that of a peak elite cultivator, rank 2, at least. Michael didn't summon Lucky or Prince for now. Without hesitation, Michael issued a cold, unwavering command. Kill every monster in sight. The moment his voice echoed, his undead army, along with Michael as the lead, vanished into the chaos. It didn't take long for the people in the surrounding area to notice the sudden shift in the battlefield. After all, how could they not? 10 humanoid figures, each radiating immense power, tore through the hordes with ruthless efficiency, relentlessly killing everything that came in their path. Michael's spear had become an extension of his will, its venom claiming one goblin life after the other. In fact, he had lost count of how many times he had swung his spear, yet despite his relentless effort, the decrease in monsters he had anticipated never came. The good thing was that thanks to his efforts, his undead, and the other supernaturals in the area, they had managed to immediately stop the carnage, even allowing some ordinary citizens to seek shelter in the still-standing buildings nearby. However, even those buildings weren't entirely safe. From time to time, agonizing screams echoed from within, piercing the air. Not all the level 1 cracks that unleashed monsters were directly above ground. Some had erupted on rooftops. The monsters emerging from those cracks were at an advantage, as they didn't fall far. They could find multiple ways to infiltrate the buildings, and when faced with even weak monsters like goblins, ordinary people didn't stand a chance. Fortunately, Michael didn't have to worry about his family. By frequently circling the vicinity of his apartment building and checking his connection with beginning, he was reassured that his family remained safe and there were no breaches around them. His aunt, though naturally kind-hearted, understood the severity of the situation and refrained from causing unnecessary trouble. And although Michael hadn't noticed any sign of monsters breaking into his apartment building since no screams had erupted so far, he didn't want to take any chances. He stationed 1 undead to actively patrol and clear the area around the building while another stood guard for potential emergencies. He also hadn't forgotten Brian's warning about the possibility of demonic supernaturals sowing more chaos. But after remaining vigilant for so long and finding no signs of their presence, Michael concluded 2 possibilities. They were either hiding and biding their time, or they were targeting more significant locations than the old estate, where Michael lived. Minutes passed as Michael mulled over his thoughts, issued commands to his undead, and continued to fight the monsters raining from the crack tirelessly. Eventually, the immediate area was cleared. However, no one celebrated. Corpses, both human and monster, were strewn across the ground, painting a grim scene of devastation. It resembled the aftermath of an apocalypse. Among the supernaturals, only a handful now remained standing, and even then, just barely. The ones who had reacted to the chaos appeared far older than Michael, a clear sign they had awakened their powers much later in their lives. The only thing distinguishing them from ordinary citizens was the life seed embedded within. But what truly gripped the crowd with dread was the sight above. The cracks in the sky had thinned, but their ominous presence remained. There were fewer of them now, not because they were closing, but because their density had dispersed, revealing a sprawling, interconnected network. Will the next cracks to break be level to S? Michael muttered, his expression soaring at the thought. He wasn't worried about the monsters themselves. Against those from level 1 cracks, he hadn't even bothered using his skills, just his raw physical stats and spear. He doubted much would change with the next wave. At most, his killing speed might slow down slightly. But what truly concerned him was the sheer volume of monsters and the escalating pattern of the cracks. The first wave had unleashed level 1 cracks. If this second wave were to bring level 2 monsters, what would follow? Level 3s? Level 4s? Michael doubted he was overthinking. Some cracks that were high in the sky and distant from his immediate vicinity radiated with a chilling, oppressive aura. Even now, they sent chills down his spine. Yet, amidst the growing dread, Michael couldn't ignore a part of himself that was relishing this unfolding chaos, a realization that left him feeling a pang of guilt. Status. Our name, Michael Norman. Class, Adept Necromancer. Our level, 15. EXP, 16,644 by 17,718. Michael felt conflicted, but knowing that he was just minutes away from leveling up made him wonder what kind of heaven and hell he had stumbled into. Chapter 119, Supernatural versus Ordinary. Heaven and hell. It seemed the perfect way to describe the scene around him. The once peaceful estate he had known for years was now drenched in blood. The fleeting sense of satisfaction Michael felt instantly vanished the moment his gaze swept over the carnage. He turned his gaze toward his apartment building, or, more specifically, the window he had leapt from. Aunt Mia stood there, peeking through the window. Her body trembled, but she forced herself to watch, not the carnage, but at him. Michael frowned. He hated what Aunt Mia was doing to herself. This was nothing short of mental torture. Yet, there were things he couldn't control, her freedom to be one of them. Strangely, while the bloody massacre before him was horrific, it stirred little more than mild discomfort. Perhaps it was because he had spent the past few days knee-deep in corpses, battling monsters, and narrowly escaping death. This kind of horror barely fazed him anymore. What he did feel, however, was anger. It wasn't a righteous fury or some heroic urge to save the world. This was personal. It was about his family. Michael had inherited this body's feelings and memories. While he still recalled his past life on Earth, those memories felt distant, like fragments of a dream. This world, though more perilous, had given him something his old life never did: a healthy body and extraordinary power. He had an incredible undead army and a unique talent. Even if someday most of it was stripped away, the healthy body alone was enough for Michael to embrace this new life fully. And now, a group of lunatics called demonic supernaturals wanted to ruin that. Michael's anger ignited, burning hot and fierce. What would have happened if he hadn't awakened? This plan had clearly been in motion far longer than Mitchell could fathom, its reach engulfing an entire city like Woodstone. Without his powers, his family, and he himself, would have perished. To some degree, Michael could understand the mindset of the demonic supernaturals. Growth often reshapes perspective. The rich cannot truly understand the struggles of the poor, just as the poor can't comprehend the life of the rich. Mortals can't fathom the thoughts of gods. But understanding did not mean forgiveness. If one aspired to live like a king, or at least experience a life different from the constraints of an ordinary life, then the battle should be against those in power, not those who didn't have any of it. In Michael's opinion, doing the opposite of this felt both flawed and twisted. As a human, he understood what he was capable of thinking. If he, one day, as a rank 4 awakener, were ever forced to stand in a long queue with ordinary humans and be treated the same, he knew he'd lose his mind. Though he didn't think this was likely to happen in real life, considering how supernaturals had little societal influence despite their overwhelming power. Who knew if something like this had happened before or not? Perhaps, at some point in his 18 years in this realm, someone with godlike abilities had been forced to behave like an ordinary human, waiting in line like everyone else alongside him. Michael could understand where the bitterness stemmed from, but that didn't excuse poor behavior. "Thank you so much for your help." Michael, who was still lost in thought as he stared at the red, gloomy sky with a frown, was pulled back to reality by a voice. He turned his head and saw an elderly man standing beside him. Though the man's face seemed vaguely familiar, Michael didn't know him personally. "It's no problem. This is what I should be doing," Michael replied politely. The old man opened his mouth to speak more, but a sudden scream cut through the air, interrupting him. Following the scream, 2 hands grabbed Michael's shirt. "You killed my father. You killed my father." A young man, roughly Michael's age, stood before him. His hair was dyed in 3 colors and tattoos covered his face. Though Michael wasn't one to judge by appearances, it was clear what kind of person was clutching his shirt now. Unfortunately, not only did Michael not know this person, but he also couldn't understand the sudden hostility. Worse still, his patience was already running thin. He had just slain over 100 monsters. His bloodlust was still simmering, and the thrill of battle was pulsing in his veins. It was a miracle he hadn't slapped the man outright. "Get your hands off me." Michael's voice was calm, but it carried a chill that sent shivers down everyone's spine who heard it. Even the surviving ordinary people, mourning over their lost loved ones or their own injuries, fell silent and stared at him. Despite the warning, the young man didn't let go. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he glared at Michael with defiance. "Oh? And what will you do? Do you think that just because you have some fancy powers, you can do whatever you want?" The youth spat, jealousy and rage flashing in his eyes. Michael's gaze turned icy. He debated whether to handle this lightly or use some force. But before he could decide how to act, a fist flew from nowhere, slamming the young man square in the face. The blow sent the youth flying 5 meters away, leaving the crowd stunned. The one who delivered the punch was someone Michael recognized, his neighbor from the apartment building. The man was one of the strongest supernaturals who had fought alongside him during the chaos. Brats these days. They don't know their limits, or when to show gratitude, the man muttered, turning to Michael, who watched him curiously. "My apologies for my nephew's behavior," the man said with a sigh. "He's just grieving my brother's death." Some people, blinded by their upbringing, believe everyone is equal. They simply refuse to accept the truth of the world. Chapter 120 Preparations. The man's words carried a trace of double meaning. It made sense. Only a supernatural could truly understand another supernatural. Michael's neighbor, who happened to be a peak mid-stage knight, seemed to embody this notion. But what surprised Michael more was how casually the man had spoken about his brother's death. For a moment, his words made Michael suspect that they might have had a strained relationship, perhaps even worse. Maybe the man had left his brother to die, unwilling to save him from the claws of the monsters. Though Michael's expression remained neutral, his wariness grew. He was already considering adding this neighbor to his blacklist when the man continued speaking. "I'm sorry for my nephew's rude behavior. The death of my brother must have been too much for him to handle." The man's voice faltered, choking on the words, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Michael's sharp eyes noticed the man's clenched fists, trembling slightly as though he was restraining himself. He's pretending to be strong, Michael thought. A faint trace of respect flickered within him. What happened to him? Michael asked, glancing around the area. The monsters were gone, and his undead stood motionless, their commands fulfilled. Well, most of them anyway. Lily and another female ORC with water-manipulating abilities were fussing over a third female ORC who shared Lily's fire affinity. The third female ORC, however, seemed more intent on scrubbing the blood off herself than paying attention to them. A clean freak ORC. Michael mused, intrigued. The intelligence and unique quirks of his rearing creatures never ceased to fascinate him. Lucky, the gluttonous wolf with boundless potential, was a stark contrast to Prince, whose calm and responsible demeanor made him seem like the true elder brother of the army. They feel so alive despite being undead. Michael's thoughts were interrupted by the trembling voice of the youth from earlier. Blood dripped from the boy's mouth as he spat bitterly. "You have so much power. My father didn't die immediately when the monsters appeared. We were holding on until a stronger one came. But where were you? You were busy killing monsters that hadn't even attacked anyone yet." Michael's eyes narrowed as realization dawned. So that's what this is about. If there was something Michael could acknowledge was wrong about him, it was that he was Drew understanding. The fact that he could reason with even a sliver of the demonic supernatural's mindset was proof of this, despite how evil their actions were. Though he didn't want to dwell on it, Michael couldn't help but imagine, if he had been powerless right now, and something had happened to his family while he survived, his grief might have driven him to blame someone, no matter if it was fair or not. But accusing others rudely was outright wrong, especially if he were the one on the receiving end of such disrespect. Michael wasn't going to lie. He was quite concerned about gaining experience points. Even so, the first monsters he cleared were the ones that were closest to people and would pose an immediate threat to them before going after others to gain points. There was no way he would let someone get killed when he had the power to stop it. No matter how tempting experience points were, those wouldn't make him flinch in such a situation. Yet, here he was, not only Michael accused, but disrespected to his face, by someone who had just witnessed his capabilities. It seemed that in this world, only the adults possessed a proper sense of reality, sensibility, and survival instincts. At least, neither Michael, from Earth, nor the original soul inhabiting this body would dare to grip someone's shirt after seeing them move at blurring speed. This scene made Michael remember a certain phrase he had often encountered as a novelist back on Earth. The phrase that would sometimes leave him cringing if used many times in one sitting. And yet, in the current situation, the saying seemed to fit perfectly. This guy was courting death. The rude youth's body trembled as he stood and approached Michael, his voice laced with self-righteousness. "I know all supernaturals are required to register with the Supers Association and protect the citizens. With your power, you are obviously someone who should carry the most responsibility, but you are nothing more than useless. If it was my uncle..." Michael had no patience for the nonsense anymore. Without a word, he immediately cast a skill on him. Slow Curse. Though the skill was at basic mastery and offered limited effects on an evenly matched opponent, against an ordinary human, it was devastating. Suddenly, the youth felt his movements turning slow. No, they didn't just slow, they halted completely. Looking into Michael's cold, expressionless eyes, dread filled his heart. The weight of Michael's overwhelming bloodlust washed over him, paralyzing the youth. "I'm going to die," he thought, terror clutching his heart. Fortunately for him, Michael had no intention of killing him. "Yes, I'm a member of the Supers Association, and yes, I'm tasked with protecting the public. But understand this, you are not entitled to my help simply because the association has imposed this role on me. Be careful." I am not as patient or forgiving as you might hope." Michael's true feelings surfaced at that moment. He despised how his growing strength as a supernatural was forcing him to understand some of the twisted words spoken by the seniors on the forum, and even the warped ideologies of demonic supernaturals. The Federation. It was nothing short of a tyrant. He was expected to risk everything, his life and the lives of his loved ones, putting himself in danger with no apparent reward, all for the Federation's cause. And if he refused, he would be branded a criminal, all because their power spanned across the entire realm, leaving no room for dissent. Michael didn't know much about the Federation, which seemed to regard itself as a kingdom with supernaturals as its subjects. But from what he had seen so far, his impression of it was far from favorable. Of course, this didn't mean Michael planned to go rogue. Doing so would bring him no benefits and would in fact cause more trouble. As tyrannical as the Federation was, it still offered advantages like the resources and protections he couldn't afford to ignore. This, and he also didn't dare to. Releasing the curse, Michael watched as the rude youth nearly collapsed face first to the ground, but his uncle caught him just in time. Michael spoke, his voice like ice as he delivered his final words. "Be careful who you speak to, especially people like me. You never know when someone might have the patience of a dog. None at all." Surprisingly, Michael's neighbor didn't react to his use of power on the nephew. Instead, the man acted as though it were normal, helping the boy up before addressing Michael. "Thank you for going easy on him," the man said with a smile that carried a deeper meaning. Michael felt a twinge of guilt. The man had just lost his brother, and now his nephew had been suppressed right in front of him, though the boy's rudeness had warranted it. As for whether this would bring trouble later, Michael didn't dwell on it. At most, the youth might try to stir up trouble, claiming Michael had abused his authority. If the Supers Association made an issue of it after everything he'd done to protect the public, it would only worsen his opinion of the Federation. Michael merely nodded at the man, ignoring the entitled nephew who, like so many other citizens, was blinded by a false sense of equality. Turning to the crowd, Michael raised his voice. "If you want to die, stay out here. More creatures will be coming through those cracks at any moment." The moment his words landed, the spectators, who had been in awe of Michael's earlier display of power when he conjured a magic circle with a mere hand gesture, snapped back to reality. Panic set in. Some rushed to more secure buildings, while others moved about indecisively. The most fearful were the seriously injured. Michael watched all of this. Initially, Michael didn't plan to get you involved, but knowing his aunt's eyes were likely on him now, he stepped up to take charge. Despite being one of the youngest present, Michael was undoubtedly the most powerful. After his recent show of strength, no one dared oppose him. However, his clear grasp of the situation soon earned him genuine respect. Aware that the next wave of monsters was only minutes away, Michael moved quickly to organize the crowd. He had his verdant wolf construct a dome-like shelter using thick, sturdy vines, directing people to take refuge inside. Compared to the fragile structures of the buildings around him, Michael trusted the durability of the vine dome far more. He also instructed the verdant wolf to wrap his apartment building in layers of vines, turning it into an armored fortress. After the initial chaos subsided, Michael noticed people peeking out from their windows in nearby buildings. He sent word around the community, asking those hiding if they wanted to join him in the shelter or remain in their apartments. Experience news stories on Empire. To ensure safety, Michael deployed his undead to accompany the team spreading the message. He gave them specific instructions to handle any lurking monsters that might have been missed during the earlier skirmish. While some of the supernaturals assisting him could handle a few stray creatures, an overwhelming number could lead to unnecessary casualties, something Michael wanted to prevent.